So for today, you definitely want a couple of yoga blocks. You don't happen to have yoga blocks at home. For today's practice, since it's restorative, I highly recommend rolled thick towels. They make a shape similar to the size of a yoga block, but it's a little bit less sharp. Sometimes I suggest using blocks, books as blocks, but you don't really want to rest on or on books. Another thing you will need is a blanket. Any sort of blanket will do. We might need a strap, so I suggest going ahead and making sure one is handy. If you don't have a yoga strap, a necktie, or a long, loosely rolled towel is a great option. Last, you'll need a bolster. If you don't have a yoga bolster specifically, a stack of bed pillows will work, or a couch cushion. You just need something that's a little bit more solid or firm than a single bed pillow tends to be. So for today's class, we're going to focus in on our hips and doing some heart opening as well. So to that end, to start class, we're going to settle into a very gentle heart opener using our props. We'll set up our recliner with our blocks and bolster. There might be a little bit of trial and error with this, especially if you're using towels instead of blocks. I like to do sort of a high block and a medium block with, I don't know, about 4 to 6 inches in between. And then I grab my bolster and lean it against the blocks, so that it's a nice incline, so we're not going into too deep of a heart opener to start class. Another thing you might want, because I'll give the option for reclined goddess legs, that might be a little intense early in your practice. So having your blanket in about a half fold and just rolling it gently and having it nearby. So that if you choose to do those legs, you can support under the thighs or knees, so you're not opening the hips too much to start as well. So as you settle in, you'll shimmy your sacrum up against the bolster, and if you're gonna consider using your blanket, I suggest having it across your mat, kind of underneath your knees, because we'll start with legs either extended out or feet planted on the floor to settle in. Then you gently shimmy your body onto your bolster. You might have to scoot down just a smidge. Ideally, your head is supported. If you have a really long torso, that may not be the case. You might scoot your sacrum a little bit away from your bolster. And as you settle, you might start tinkering with the legs. So maybe you like them extended. It's actually pretty nice with the blanket underneath the knees, especially if you have hyperextended knees. You might bring that blanket a little bit up, pull the edges towards you, and let your knees open out into reclined goddess. So you're supporting under the knees and under the thighs, so you're not putting pressure on your low back. Often this posture can create discomfort or tension in the lumbar spine. But most important here is that you're finding a place of spaciousness across the front side of the body and comfort. So any modifications, additions, or removal of props is totally appropriate here. Arms are in a very gentle T shape by your side. You can simply close the eyes to arrive in your practice. As we move through our restorative practice this afternoon, remember we are going for a workload of 4 or less. We're not forcing depth of stretch. We're allowing allowing the props to do the work today. Finding postures for anywhere between 2 and 4 minutes per side allows us to move beyond stretching and approaching flexibility from the muscle and targeting the connective tissue. As you pause, feel free to set an intention for your practice today. Perhaps you're cultivating a sense of openness or acknowledging a sense of vulnerability. Maybe you're simply here to find release or let go of tension. Wherever you are in your breath cycle, go ahead and exhale everything out. We'll inhale together for a count of 4. 3, 2, 1. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Allowing your breath to return to its natural pattern, but pausing to notice how a guided 4-count breath has affected the body. As we pause for a few more rounds of breath, feel free to gently shake your head no, using the bolster to gently massage the back of the skull. Often a little bit of relief there might help us let go of a tension headache and reduce tension through the neck in general. Evening out that tick-tock of the head, returning to neutral. You have your legs in reclined goddess. Go ahead and guide them up with or without your hands. Then maybe they stretch long or the feet stay planted on the mat. Then we'll place our hands just by our hips so that we can gently push ourselves up to a seat. Pausing upright briefly, and maybe the chin drops to the chest. And then we'll shift into our next supported posture. Restorative yoga has a lot of moving parts, so there's not a lot of points for grace when we move between postures. We want to try to move as little as possible. So as we set up for the next posture, you may need your blocks but most likely not. So you can kind of set them off to the side. You can bring a bolster in front of you. I'm going to turn sideways, longwise on my mat. You can just stay wherever you can see or hear best on the screen. And then another option with your blanket, you might just unroll it and fold it into its quarter to give a little extra cushion. I know I said I was going to turn longwise, and I will. But we're going to take a little bit of seated forward folding in a very gentle straddle. We're not going for depth of stretch. There's no prize for belly to the mat. But I want to talk about your pelvis here for a moment and why you might want to sit on your blanket. So we always talk about, and taking my classes, I talk about moving the booty meat out of the way so you're sitting on top of your sits bones, which will be applicable in your straddle. The other thing I want you to focus on is where your pelvis is in space. Often when we do seated forward folds, we rock backwards on our pelvis, which puts a lot of tension on our low backs. So sometimes you might even feel like you're pitching forward because you're on top of your sits bones and you tend to rock back. That tendency comes from a variety of things. It could have to do with tight hips, but it often has a lot to do with actually tight hamstrings. So sitting on the blanket, just that little bit of a lift, gives you just a gentle encouragement forward so you don't rock backwards into your pelvis. So as you set up here for your straddle stretch, we're not going to the depth. We're not shooting for 180 degrees. We're just finding something that we feel sensation in, but we're not about to die if we hold it there. So checking in with your pelvis, you want to start upright with two shoulders stacked over two hips. You can grab your bolster. We have lots of options here depending on how far forward you want to go. So you can angle your bolster so that a flat edge, just be sure there is not a zipper on any of the edges that you lean onto. And you can bring that edge, kind of hug the bolster and lean your chest forward. So your low back is still straight. You're kind of lifting up to hinge. Then you can just gently drop your forehead forward, rest your chin on your bolster, and this might be enough. I do kind of suggest keeping a little bit of action through your feet here. Tendency is to kind of have little floppy fish feet. And while that is much more relaxing, it can sometimes create some weird pressures on your joints. Having a little bit of flexion through your feet helps maintain alignment from hip to knee to ankle. So depth of this forward fold is up to you. You always want to be reaching forward as far forward as you can. Maintains length in your low back. And then you can get into that hip stretch, which you're probably quickly finding is also a hamstring stretch. If you're like, I'd like to go a little bit deeper, you could turn your bolster to the medium side. They function similarly to the way we work through the block. And you reach forward and you could drape over the bolster there as well. You could also let the bolster lay flat, getting a little bit closer to your mat. Even if you have the range of motion to lay all the way down, I invite you to kind of see how it feels to use the prop for a longer hold. As you breathe here, your inhales create length through the spine. And the exhale might tip you just a little bit farther forward. As you hold here, feel your body let the prop support you. So we're not using arm strength here. We're not holding tension necessarily in the back of our neck, but you are surrendering and and finding some outward stillness. As you surrender forward, let the notion of openness wash over you. As you take about 5 more rounds of your breath pattern, you might notice you can surrender a little deeper. You might feel a little more space around the hip joints, maybe down the hamstrings, or through the inner thigh. As you round out those breath patterns, you can gently walk yourself upright. Maybe take a couple shoulder rolls up, back, and down. And then scooch the bolster out of your way. Kind of help your legs come center, shimmy them in. Planting the feet in front of you, just about hip distance apart. Fingers behind you. And just gently windshield wiper the knees from side to side. Letting go of any potential tension in the low back. And feeling a little bit of movement through the entire hip joint. And then you can scoot your blanket out of the way. For this next one, we have kind of a thread of hip openers. We're going to start with 90-90 or fire log. Then we'll shift into pigeon. And then we'll finish, and this is all on one side. And then we'll finish in a different style of 90-90, kind of hitting all edges of the hips. So make sure lots of props are handy. If for any reason pigeon is particularly uncomfortable for your body, when we transition there, I highly suggest taking recline pigeon in that figure 4 shape to protect the joints. But we've also got all our props to help us with that as well. So I'm going to scoot my bolster to the top edge of my mat. Before I get up there, I'm going to unfold my blanket into that half fold and find that kind of long roll, similar to the roll we had at the beginning of class. And then I'm also going to take that roll and I'm going to have it about my quad's length away from the top edge of my mat. Then I'm going to shimmy my way forward. And I'm going to sit on that roll. So you might have to do some adjusting. I had a very inaccurate perception of how long my quads are. The reason, and you're welcome to not directly align, but I like to use my mat here to help me find my right angles. So for my bottom leg, which for me is going to be my right leg, just be sure that you do both sides as we move through this. You'll know immediately, however, if you do the same side twice. So I like to line up my quad with my long edge of my mat and my shin with my front edge of the mat. This helps me make sure that I'm not accidentally shifting into like crisscross applesauce, because that's easier for settling in. You might also need your blocks handy, depending on how your hips are today. Then you take your left ankle across that right quad. I like to have it just behind my knee, and I also kind of like to have the bony part of my ankle hanging off my leg, because otherwise it is just a lot of pressure for my joints. And you might be like, wow, this is a lot already. It is. Maybe you take a block and pop it for extra support on your left side. Maybe it's supporting through the whole thigh. Maybe your knee is like up against your chest. That's okay too. And you might have your block on a higher level. And this very well may be plenty for you sitting upright. Maybe you just gently rest your hands across your leg. And you're just trying to sit up tall and acknowledge the sensation that's happening. 90-90 can be pretty intense. Down, for me, I'm feeling it around the external rotators on both legs, even down my quads, especially on my bottom leg. But if you're like, oh, this feels great, I don't feel anything at all, fantastic, I'm very happy for you. You might grab your bolster and start to lean into it. You can, of course, lay all the way down if that happens to be a thing for you. But again, thinking about that low back, that kind of tip forward versus drop back and round. And we're just gonna sit with this for about a minute or so. For me, engaging with that equal parts breath that we did at the beginning of class helps calm my mind here. This is an intense hip opener for my body, and I have sort of that initial fight or flight reaction. So a focused 4-count breath in and out allows me to settle and find comfort in this shape. If you have very open hips, and this is not necessarily a lot of sensation for you, also give a little bit of engagement to your core. Feeling your belly button pull to the spine helps you continue to maintain squareness across your hips. It might help you from what's called overstretching beyond your alignment. And you can gently, if you've leaned forward, walk yourself up. And we're gonna lift our left foot and just sort of plant it on the mat or the floor, no fancy way. And we're gonna pull our right heel in toward our left hip. So we're changing that angle from a 90-degree angle to a pretty acute angle. This is so that as we shift into our pigeon pose, we're not forcing the depth and maybe putting too much pressure on the joints once again. And you can kind of lean over to your right and guide your left leg behind. Then you can frame your front leg, maybe shift your hips back slightly so you're on that blanket. I like the blanket here because it helps my left hip flexor find the mat. It kind of balances out just a little bit and helps me feel that openness across the front of my extended leg. And then there are lots of options here too. Maybe you need a block under a booty cheek of that right leg. Maybe you want to come down to your elbows. Maybe you're like, nope, I want to rest on my bolster or pillow. Again, finding the depth that works best for you. Restorative yoga is very much about listening to your body and letting it settle into a posture. Once you have gotten yourself situated, if you would like to shimmy your right shin more toward a right angle, that's totally acceptable. But sometimes, even if you have open hips, that less severe of an angle will still soothe your hips and help you find openness. Feel free to find one cheek. You could find the forehead, whatever is comfortable here as you surrender into your sleeping pigeon. As you pause here, you might notice different emotions or anxieties pop up in your mind. Just acknowledge them and then let them go. We tend to hold anxiety up in our hips. So whenever we're in a pretty stressful situation, we might find that our hips are a little bit tighter than they normally are. You've got a cheek turned one way, go ahead and swap it to the opposite direction. As you continue to pause, check in with how you maybe are inadvertently engaging muscles. I noticed that I was like really tense through my right forearm and tricep. And as you're ready, you can gently walk up to your hands, maybe a slight chest opener to the ceiling. As we transition to our last hip opener in this series, you can drop your weight over a little bit to the right, leaving your hand there for support. So the leg that's extended, you're going to bring it up to a 90-degree angle from your hip. So your left knee and shin, well, your left knee is probably lining up with the edge of your mat, give or take. So depending on your joint pressures here, the farther in your left heel comes, the less pressure on that knee. This is hitting that internal rotator of that back leg pretty intensely. And so you can stay just upright here. This might be pull on T. Another option would be to kind of shimmy your bolster around to the right side of your body. You can gently walk toward it, taking a twist. Ideally, 2 elbows come onto that bolster. This one is a little bit more work than other postures, so we don't stay here quite as long. Your inhale here maintains length through your spine, as the exhale surrenders ever so slightly into that gentle-ish twist. Your legs are in the position similar to when cheerleaders are sitting on the sidelines at a sport. It's kind of that same position. You can gently start to walk yourself up, squaring back off to the short edge of your mat. You can kind of grab on the back of your left thigh. Help that leg come back forward, planted on the mat. Fingers come behind you. Right foot joins it. Give yourself a little bit of a windshield wiper. Because then, good news, two sides. So you get to go through all of those on your second side. So feel free to readjust props, maybe shimmy back up onto your blanket. And for me, I'm going to my left side. Just be sure that you put the opposite leg on the bottom. And so we started with 90-90 or fire log, depending on what you call it. And we make that right angle. Quad lining up with the long edge, shin lining up with the short edge. Then we figure for the right angle across. And if you happen to have two blankets, another option would be to just press a blanket underneath that ankle bone if that gives you any trouble, if it's uncomfortable to drape it all the way across the quad. Then you can decide, do I need or want, right? Sometimes adding a prop in a restorative prop practice is not necessarily about what you need, it's also about what you want. So maybe you shimmy a block right up underneath that quad to help reduce any pressure. Maybe you're like, no, this side's okay. You could also, if you don't need as much of a block, but a little bit of support, you could shimmy the tail of your blanket roll underneath your leg as well. You might have already noticed, you might have a very drastic difference from one side to the other, where one knee is really high, one knee is a little bit low. That's totally natural. A lot of our yoga helps us bring balance and symmetry where maybe it isn't already there. And then you can choose upright is plenty, or maybe you need your bolster, leaning your chest forward slightly or all the way. As we settle in for this delightful hip stretch on our second side. Maybe quiet your mind with an equal parts breath. Maybe you draw your attention to the intention you set at the beginning of practice. As we settle here, maybe you've gotten past the sudden reaction to 90-90 from your body. And you're starting to feel a little bit of a deeper stretch as the body begins to agree to the posture we've given it. And if you've hinged forward, you can go ahead and lock yourself up. Slide your bolster out of your way. Kind of guide that right foot to the mat. If you have any props, you might want to scoot them out of your way just a little bit. As we pull the left heel toward the right hip, and then we start to creep that right leg behind. Once it starts to extend behind you, you can press into your hands as they frame the front leg and roll over onto the front of the back leg. Often when we settle into pigeon, our knee and toes want to splay out to the side, but you want to have your kneecap and shoelace side of your foot on the mat. Maybe you've got that blanket helping bring the floor just a little bit closer to that hip flexor. Maybe you've got a block under the left booty cheek. And then when you're ready, you can surrender forward over that front leg. Relaxing into your bolster or any other props. If you choose to find one cheek to the mat or the bolster, I'll give you a cue about halfway through, give or take, to swap cheeks. Maybe once again acknowledge some feelings or sensations that pop up for you. I know personally there's been a lot of extra stress as I prepare to teach my fall semester. As a professor, I am teaching in new modalities, worried about all kinds of things. And I know people whose children are heading off to school. There's been a lot of stress and anxiety there. So my guess is many of us have a little bit more tightness through our hips than we maybe normally used to. You got a cheek to one side, go ahead and swap sides. And you pause for the next couple rounds of breath. Maybe do a mental check-in with your body. Becoming aware of how it feels and how it's acclimated to the postures thus far. And as you're ready, you can walk up on your palms. Let your left hand shift to the outside as you bend the back knee, finding that new version of 90-90. We've still got some 90-degree angles happening. But this time, instead of focusing on those internal rotators, we're targeting that, instead of focusing on the external rotators, we're targeting the internal rotator into the hip flexor. And I also feel a lot of sensation on the top of my hip joint. Maybe you shimmy that bolster to your left side as you reach up to walk over into that twist. I like to rest my elbows on the bolster. You're also welcome to rest your elbows on the mat or floor. Remembering that breath creates length through the spine on the inhale, and maybe a little bit of depth of twist on your exhale. And gently walking yourself back centered, finding a neutral spine, and helping that right leg, however works best for you, up and around. 2 feet plant on the mat. We windshield wiper once more. As we worked through those hip stretches, you might now also, as you just come to a very gentle seat, notice some space in your low back, as well as down the hamstrings. As we shift into, we've got about 2 more postures. We're going to find another heart opener variation. I've really come to enjoy this one recently, and it uses your blanket. So unrolling your blanket, folding that blanket into quarters, and then rolling. So your roll is a little bit thicker, and the roll in general is probably about the length of your torso. Then you set your blanket roll in the center of your mat. If you have a really long torso, you might want to just make sure there's a little bit of room on the other end, still on your mat, for your head. So this is a much deeper heart opener than we took in our recliner goddess position. This is a supported fish pose. There are a variety of ways to support fish pose. This is my current favorite. So similar to how we set up for our first heart opener, we shimmy our hips up to the base of our roll. And I like to keep my feet planted on the mat here with my knees to the ceiling as I settle into this posture. Then you settle down, roll on the spine. You might have to shimmy your hips down or up once you get there. So you're sort of spilling over that blanket. Here I like, an option here could be keep your arms by your sides, similar to fish pose. Legs could extend out long. I also really enjoy a gentle T shape here. So it might take a second to find your balance on your blanket roll. You might shimmy a little from side to side. As you feel the shoulder blades start to hug the blanket. If your spine or your torso is very long, the crown of your head might be touching the floor behind you. And that's okay. If that's too much, maybe you shimmy a block under your head or grab a second blanket. So here, you start to feel some openness across the collarbones. Because of the placement of the blanket, I also start to feel some interesting sensation along the muscles that support my spine, up and down the sides of my spine. Personally, I have scoliosis, and so those muscles get really tense in my low back and up in my shoulders anyway. And so this helps me feel some nice space there that I generally am unable to attain. Heart openers like these also help us reverse all our technology hunger. You might start to feel that sensation of openness wash over you once more. Perhaps even a sense of vulnerability. Heart openers are creating space across the chest, through the collarbones, between the ribs, opening up all of that protection of all of our vital organs. Our natural instinct is to round and cover, crunching. So this might be a lot for both your mind and body. As we pause here, maybe you gently play tug of war with your hands, reaching one hand a little bit farther away and then the other. Might massage there between your shoulder blades. Once again, getting a little bit of action across the base of the skull. Or maybe your body's like, nope, I want to stay still. And that's okay too. If you took that tug of war, go ahead and pause in stillness once more. And gently pick a side and allow your body to roll, using your arm as a pillow off of that blanket. Just gently pausing and allowing that sensation to settle into your body. And you can guide yourself up to a seat. We started a minute or two late, so we will probably run over a minute or two, just to be sure we get a nice shavasana. But I've got one more hip opener. I did say it was hips and hearts today. So for this one, I'm just going to spread my blanket out, mostly because I'm going to turn to face you. We're going to take half frog. I often shy away from teaching frog pose, full frog, because it's very easy to accidentally put a lot of pressure on the lumbar spine. But I find that half frog helps us target the inner thigh into the hip flexor without pressure on the low back. So you're welcome to turn sideways like I have and spread your blanket out, but you can also do this lengthwise on your mat. We're going to find our belly to the floor. And bringing the shoulders under, the elbows under the shoulders, we're going to move from Sphinx pose into half frog. And at any time, you're also welcome to let the elbows go wide, use the hands as a pillow, and keep the entire front side of the body down on the mat. If you're using your Sphinx pose, you want to feel the belly button pulling away from the mat, engaging the core just a little bit to protect the low back. And then you're going to bend your right knee up in line with the hip. So you've got a right angle from the hip to the knee and from the knee to the foot. So maybe you stay up on your forearms, maybe surrender the chest to the mat. Feeling Two hips working to stay square or flat, with quotation marks there, to the mat. You can press your foot back behind you, lengthening through the leg. Maybe you come back up onto the elbows if you lay the torso down, and pull the left knee up. And choosing to stay up or torso down. Just letting that half frog settle in on your second side. You'll be feeling nice and grounded into the mat. And pressing the left foot back behind you. And you can press your hands underneath your shoulders, hips to the heels, pausing briefly in your favorite child's pose. And when you're ready, you can bring yourself up, transitioning into your favorite shavasana. That could be legs up the wall, if you have wall space handy. That could be splayed out, taking up space, laying on your back. You're welcome to have a neck roll with your blanket. You can use the bolster under your knees to reduce tension in your low back. It also gives your hips and legs a gentle floating sensation. But also feel free to explore some less traditional shavasana. Occasionally, some people really enjoy a shavasana on the belly. Sometimes your body just needs to lay on its favorite side. Just honoring how your body will most easily settle into stillness and surrender in your shavasana. I also know that practicing at home makes it very easy to walk away when it's shavasana time. Not because we don't think shavasana is important, but because sometimes we have a to-do list on the back burner of our brain. As you settle, let go of any guided breath you may have taken throughout your postures. Maybe you take a couple deep inhales and audibly sigh out any final bits of tension. As you arrive, the stillness of both mind and body of your shavasana. Perhaps you still your mind with the focus of your intention. Or you feel that sense of cultivating openness throughout the body, washing over you. Or maybe it settles on the rhythmic nature of your natural breath pattern. If your mind begins to wander, simply call it back. Bring it back to the breath or intention that guided your practice. And if you're ready, feel free, of course, to remain in Shavasana as long as serves you. But if you're ready, you can begin to deepen the breath, billowing through the front side of the body, and then sighing it out with the exhale as you invite movement back in. And you gently wiggle with the fingers and toes, perhaps running each finger over the thumb. Maybe your movements gradually get bigger throughout the body as you invite life back in on your terms. Eventually reaching for a full body stretch, fingers away from toes, then hugging the knees to the chest, pausing there, perhaps a gentle sway from side to side. Then choosing how you will arrive at a comfortable seat. Perhaps you roll to one side and press up through the hand. Maybe you take a gentle rock and roll forward and back into your favorite seat. As you arrive upright, eyes are closed or downcast, hands rest on the legs, palms facing up. Feeling long through the spine as the crown of the head reaches toward the ceiling. Shoulders stack over hips. Inhaling together, arms reach high, palms meeting at the top. Exhale, hands pause at your third eye as you seek openness of mind. They rest at your lips so that you find honest words, and they settle at your heart as you arrive at a happy heart. Thank you for allowing me to be your guide for your practice. Namaste. Thanks, you guys.
Molly, I liked your ending.
Oh, thanks.
I've never seen that before. Thank you so much.
Oh, really? It took me a long time to get it after I did my teacher training, but now that's like how I end all of my mat classes. When I teach aerial, I have a different close, but in all my mat classes that I teach, that's how I like to close it out.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye, everybody.
Bye.